Are you and Rhythm friends? No. Story time about why you and Rhythm are friends, that's not gonna happen. My goal is not to ever, like, put nobody on blast or, like, you know, do all of that. It's not my vibe, especially with people that I've considered to be my real friends. That's just not something I will ever do. I'm sure it's your fault. Okay, well, go to her page and ask. Blocked. People are so weird. And yes, usually when I'm not friends with somebody, it is because I cut them off. I don't think I've ever been cut off by anybody because I don't do weird. So when y'all don't see me with nobody, just know I don't play. And I don't waste time. What is the tea with you and the Victor twins? Blah, blah, blah. I know that that's one of the Victor twins. That's either Danny or for Gabby. Nobody talks about the Victor twins in 2025. So get your loser out of my life. Like, literally. Nobody's asking about the Victor twins. I haven't seen in 6 years, bro. Except for y'all. Like, please get a body in a subscription. That. I don't see half the comments you read out loud. Very weird.
There is a specific kind of quiet violence that lives inside the architecture of attention economies, and it reveals itself most clearly when relationships fray in public. The story we are tracing begins with a decision. A person who had once moved in the same orbit as a set of fellow creators chose, deliberately and privately, to sever that orbit. The decision was simple in its mechanics: to block, to withdraw, to stop showing up, and yet it carried a complexity that spills out in many directions. Questions about dignity, safety, the anatomy of friendship in a world where kinship is mediated by metrics, and the cultural machinery that turns difference into warfare. When the person at the center of this choice described why the ties were cut, she did so with a careful reserve that disguised a long sequence of small violences: being gaslit by people she had once trusted, being subjected to performative disinterest, finding her private pain rendered into public content. And then, after the severance, came an escalation that belongs to the darker playbook of online life: the creation of pages designed to harass, to spam, to swing the machinery of social platforms into organized social punishment. To unpack what this means, we must look in 3 directions at once: inward to the psychology of the individuals involved, outward to the platform incentives that make such acts efficacious, and backward to the longer cultural histories that make public shaming legible and familiar. When someone whose life is conducted partially in public decides to disconnect from certain acquaintances, there is a conventional narrative that greets that decision. The narrative imagines a falling out between people who once shared meals or ideas. It imagines gossip and betrayal, the leaking of secrets, and slow accumulation of slights that finally becomes intolerable. But in the world of internet personalities, the logic of separation is often more immediate and tactical. A block, a cutoff, a sudden absence does not simply mark private grief. It functions as a boundary against further harm. The person who made the choice we are discussing described exactly this: an aversion to spectacle, an unwillingness to provide the raw material of other people's content, and a preference for a life that is not constantly audited by strangers. She chose privacy because exposure was not a reward, but an ongoing cost. And that refusal to be endlessly available, to be the background for someone else's narrative, is, in the current regime of attention, often read as arrogance or as a moral failing. The demand that every interpersonal rupture be turned into content has become a new kind of coercion. If you do not perform your pain for the camera, you are seen as hiding something. If you do perform it, you are accused of seeking clout. There is a trap on both sides, and the person at the center decided to avoid it by removing herself from the field. There is an additional moral logic at play, one that has ancient roots but modern effects. Friendships, traditionally, have been private contracts of mutual care and discreet reciprocity. In this digital era, those contracts are frequently reinterpreted as lineage markers. A colleague becomes an ally becomes a brand. When the obligations of friendship are turned into obligations of representation, you must stand publicly for the person who nominated you, endorse their content, be the loyal shadow for the camera. The very texture of human relations changes. The person who pulled away noted that she never wanted to put people on blast, that the last thing on her mind was to weaponize relationships. That statement in our era is an ethical claim and strategic one. It rests on the conviction that human bonds should not be turned into spectacle and that loyalty should not be convertible into content. When other parties treat friendship as a commodity, they betray the contract. The response is to close the market. What compounds this is the culture of embellishment that lives inside many creator circles. Within a subculture that thrives on hyperbole, every action has to be dramatized, every slight amplified, every forgiveness scored in public. The person who recounted the break explained that when she chooses to end a relationship, it is usually because she has been the one to draw the line. She is not accustomed to being publicly expelled. That statement is small but revealing. The power to cut off is, in many microcultures, the power to maintain dignity. To be severed by others, especially in a visible way, is to be humiliated, to be stripped of agency. So choosing to step away is a way of keeping control over the narrative of departure. She chose to close the door on her own terms, and in doing so she tried to avoid adding fuel to the spectacle machine. Then the situation shifted into something uglier. People who had shared space with her, a group of twins who had once been part of her social orbit, began to operate in the spare ecosystem that platforms make possible. They created pages whose sole purpose was to spam, to harass, to circulate images and accusations in a way designed to multiply the emotional cost of being public. The act of setting up such pages is not an accident. It plays into specific affordances of social platforms. Algorithms reward engagement. Engagement is often driven by outrage. Outrage is easily manufactured when a narrative can be repeated across dozens or hundreds of micropages, when the same meme appears in 1,000 timelines. The twins' creation of attack pages thus sleeps inside a machine that transforms interpersonal disputes into industrial media operations. The hostility is not simply personal, it is structural. The twins were tapping a circuit that transforms small grievances into viral spectacles, and they did so with an economy of scale. One post, multiplied through multiple accounts, creates a resonance that a single person cannot produce. This tactic, the creation of spam pages to harass a former friend, is not merely a modern twist on bullying. It is an industrialized approach to social pressure that combines psychological warfare with media mechanics. What it does, effectively, is to cascade shame. It creates an echo chamber of condemnation that makes moderation systems struggle, because platforms overwhelmed often respond in blunt ways. Removing one page here, the person starts 3 more there. Flagging an account sends a problem into a black box of uncertain outcomes. The hounded person is left to navigate a labyrinth that drags private pain into public. There is also a performative quality to this type of harassment. It is not only about damaging the person at the center. It is about signaling to others that dissent, that refusal to be performatively loyal, will be punished. The act is therefore a form of governance, an attempt to police the norms of the community by making an example.